All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Digital Perspectives. I'm Brad Kimes. You can follow me on Twitter at @BackupBradley above at the top of the screen and everything that we're talking about here. Okay, right now I have up the Wikipedia for Debt Jubilee. It's specific to the pandemic, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But we're going to talk about the U.S. debt clock. We're going to talk about a couple recent letters that came in begging for debt forgiveness for 77 of the poorest countries in the world. Shout out to Michael C. on that one. And we're going to talk about what we covered the other day, Judy Shelton, and the idea that she has about a gold-backed bond market system backing the pretty much the basic major currencies of the world, and about how that is really, in her mind, designed to keep everybody a little more honest when it comes to currency manipulation. And we're also going to hear some clips here from Jim Rickards to talk about another notion in order for that gold bond market to even work. So let's go ahead and get into this thing. Debt Jubilee is nothing new. It goes back to the biblical times. But let's see what it says here. Debt Jubilee is a clearance of debt from public record across a wide sector or a nation. Such a jubilee was proposed as a solution to debt incurred or anticipated during the 2020 pandemic recession. Now, again, it goes back to biblical times. It goes far back as Hebrew slaves and prisoners would be freed, debts would be forgiven, and the mercies of God would be particularly manifest. That was the thought back in the biblical times. In finance, a write-down and a revaluation of fixed assets is an action that may be required to accurately describe the true value of the capital goods a business owns. This should be distinguished from planned depreciation, where recorded decline in value of assets is tied to its age. So just wanted to throw those in. And obviously we covered a debt forgiveness situation that happened in Germany a long time ago when they changed the currency over. It was a whole thing. We covered that. You can watch that video on my search playlist as well. Debt Jubilee, if you type that in, you will get a lot of information in my video playlist. So, okay, so let's keep this thing going here. Just looking now at the U.S. debt clock, 26 trillion plus. And looking down here at the U.S. national total assets, which we were covering this when it crossed over and went negative. 131 trillion plus on total national assets. The U.S. unfunded liabilities, unfortunately, is at 153 trillion and rising. We have been underwater for quite some time. Now, let's get it. That's the U.S. So now let's shift gears and look at some of the thoughts about what's happening in some of the poorest countries of the world. This is a letter from faith leaders around the world. Listen to this letter. We are leaders from different faith communities around the United Kingdom. We are writing to urge your support our most vulnerable sisters and brothers worldwide as they seek to survive and rebuild from the pandemic. We welcome the efforts you made at the G20 finance ministers meeting in April to reach an agreement for temporary suspensions of debts owed to other governments by those with the world's poorest 77 countries. We now ask you to work with your fellow finance ministers at this month's G20 meeting to cancel rather than merely suspend bilateral debt payments, as well as to urge World Bank, IMF, and private creditors to cancel debt payments owed in 2020 and 2021 by these countries. This is a critical and rapid means of ensuring the health workers in developing countries have the best chance of helping to defeat the pandemic, and the countries that have the resources at hand to build back from the economic devastation the pandemic has weakened, including by assisting communities already being hit by the effects of the climate crisis. The immediate risks that the pandemic poses to poverty reduction efforts are both clear and shocking. In total, the World Bank estimates that between 71 and 100 million people risk falling into extreme poverty as a result of the pandemic. The World Food Program forecasts that around 270 million people around the world will face acute food insecurity by the end of this year, a doubling of the approximately 130 million who suffered severe food shortages last year. The International Labor Organization predicts that up to 340 million jobs could be lost. To insist on debt repayments in the face of the suffering caused by this pandemic would be an affront to the faith traditions that we represent. Indeed, this is an overarching moral case for debt relief in many faiths. And here we see below texts in both Hebrew scriptures and New Testament call for a debt cancellation and for making good debt relationships every 7 years, with a debt jubilee every 15. This is when you get down into it, and we covered that a second ago, but I'm just showing you here the list of faith leaders around the world who support this effort. This is a direct conversation going on with the G20 finance ministers. Okay? This is July 14th, just 2 days ago. The Institute of International Finance, the IIF. Progress update on private sector engagement to G20 Debt Service Suspension Initiative, the DSSI. I'm going to read this first page, and then we're just going to do a couple highlights in this document because it's powerful. Following up the discussion during the Paris Forum G20 event on July 8th, we are pleased to provide the following progress update on private sector engagement with respect to the G20 Debt Service Suspension Initiative, known as DSSI. We would also like to take this opportunity to highlight other important efforts underway to support the ability of vulnerable sovereign borrowers to service their debt amid these challenges posed by the pandemic. We are very much welcome to the G20 initiative to the Marshall support to alleviate the economic and humanitarian impact of the pandemic. An integral part of these efforts will be promoting alignment and approach across public and private sectors to ensure our collective response, as noted in the G20 communique, is effective as possible. Towards this end, we believe that good communication is essential, and we therefore have been providing regular briefings on private sector perspectives. These briefings have been informed by discussions of the IIF Committee of Sovereign Risk Management, known as the CSRM, which now numbers over 200 members from more than 100 financial services firms worldwide. These firms span the spectrum of the financial service industry, from banks to pension funds, insurers, asset managers, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and service firms, including credit rating agencies, sovereign advisor, and law firms. Collectively, these firms represent some $45 trillion in assets under management. Now, it does say here we work with the private sector creditors, which is producing a growing toolkit of ways to facilitate private sector participation in the DSSI, has benefited greatly from regular engagement with the IMF, World Bank, and Paris Club. Okay, now let's skip down here. And again, you can see heavily involved letters to the IMF and World Bank and the OECD and Paris Club noted pre-existing problem of high global debt levels. It has greatly exacerbated the dilemma for many of the countries hit hardest by the economic impact of the pandemic. Now, I'm going to go here to the next part here. One second. Let's see here. Okay, so that's page 2. Got it. Terms of service. On May 28th, the G20, IMF, World Bank, Paris Club introduced newly developed terms of service, voluntary private sector participation in the Debt Service Suspension Initiative. Now, I'm just going through some of this for you guys, right? So that's all I'm doing here. And I'm going to skip down now to page 3, right? Need for a waiver with respect to requests to forbearance from official creditors. Now, what this begins to get into in this document, because, you know, it's not just about canceling debt. You can't just cancel debt. It's not, well, forget it, you don't owe me anymore. See, there's bondholders that hold this debt. So this has to be worked out with the person that's actually holding the debt of this now nation who can't pay for it. All right. So need for waiver with respect to requests for forbearance from official creditors. And this goes into, it begins to start the conversation of how do you get this waiver designed to really make sure that the bondholders are either made whole or will be made whole in the future. All right, page 4. Bondholders looking for ways to support sovereign borrowers, including via restructuring where needed. I'm not going to read all of this to you. I will provide the documents in the comment section for you to see. But this is about debt restructuring at this point. What you see here is about debt restructuring conversation. Now, the faith leaders have come back in light of this and have now asked that the entire debt be canceled for at least the entirety of 2020 and 2021 at the very least, right? That, to me, is pretty remarkable, to be honest with you. So this gets very, very interesting. And, you know, when you think about the implications of this, and here is, again, you know, from groups including bondholder committees, from the individual efforts of wide range financial firms, there's tremendous appetite to help vulnerable borrowers with debt service problems. Private creditors and actively engage with the borrowers, both formally and informally, to alleviate liquidity and solvency problems. You know, again, we are at the very least seeing them have an incredible conversation about forbearance and pushing it back, right? It tells me that if you have the faith leaders also that have pushed for that and now are pushing to go ahead and cancel the debt, that conversation is about to begin, because they're already seriously working to really put it in forbearance. So this gets more interesting by the day, ladies and gentlemen. And again, you know, shout out to Michael C., Institute of International Finance. This is pretty remarkable. Then we get to this lady right here, Judy Shelton. Judy Shelton, who has introduced the idea of creating a new financial instrument, which would be a gold-backed bond that's physically redeemable, that would be measured to 1 ounce of gold and the equivalent in cash. It's redeemable either in cash or gold. This would be a new monetary system approach to help level the playing field and keep everyone a little more honest when it comes to currency manipulation, right? Okay, so let's see if we can get this document up here really quickly. All right, so I typed up a few things so we could go through this. Okay, so let's take a look at this now. Let me open this up a little bit just so it's a little easier reading here. Okay. Judy Shelton, gold-backed bonds for each major currency. Now, the reason we're looking at this is because we see that we just came from the idea notion that a debt jubilee is being considered. We certainly know that they're in the process of working out a debt forbearance, which is pushing the debt back. Add in the fact that Judy Shelton is getting ready to be voted on in 5 days. And it does look like she will be confirmed to be a part of the Federal Reserve chair. And we are talking about that conversation. Look, there's two conversations. The U.S. is obviously a superpower, the biggest economy in the world. And they don't have the problem. They have the same problems that the 77 world's poorest countries do. It's just you're not seeing it yet and feeling it yet, quite yet, the way they're feeling it in those 77 countries. So the idea that she may be confirmed may bring in the notion of the Treasury creating, as she has suggested in that video I showed you and I've covered yesterday, that there's a new financial instrument which would be a gold-backed bond that's created that would be the equivalent of 1 ounce of gold and the cash equivalent, either the gold or the cash, whatever you choose at its 5-year maturity. So looking at that idea, each country would have its own bond market backing the dollar, using gold as a neutral reference point to establish consistent measurement. behind all currencies rather than each country having the ability to manipulate their currency at will. This proposes that each country is obliged to keep its currency properly valued to 1 ounce of gold, guaranteeing that they will always receive the proper equivalent to 1 ounce of gold. This system would be designed specifically to keep individual countries in check for currency manipulation. Now here's some thoughts that I had. Will this system be built on a universal ledger like the XRP ledger? I still see a need to settle with this neutral asset or reference point like XRP, which I believe is a currency to begin with. XRP could settle the entire system to ensure that each country's currency remains within its own system. Not that you couldn't hold another currency, but at this point, there's not a need to. XRP could settle the bond markets as well as all trade. Overall, I can see this system coming together, but one big point to consider. Gold is $1,800, give or take. $1,813 right now. What do you think this new bond market would do to the price of gold? A new use case brought to gold to back the major currencies of the world. Maybe Jim Rickards was right when he said gold will need to be $10,000 to $15,000 an ounce in order to support the new monetary system. And maybe Judy Shelton's gold-backed bond market could be the very instrument that helps to drive the price to get it there. Now, before we close, I want to play for you a video of Jim Rickards talking about exactly that. Let's talk after this.
One of the things that could happen is, goes by different names, a reset, reboot, reform of the international monetary system. But you could have something like a new Bretton Woods conference where, convening power gets the G7 or the G20 or, the leading top 10 gold holders in the world together to reform the international monetary system. If you wanted anything from a strict gold standard, a classic gold standard of the kind we had in the late 19th century, or even a modified gold standard where gold was going to be a reference point for discretionary monetary policy, as a way to restore confidence, saying to people, okay, we get it, you've lost confidence in us, but don't worry, we're going to use gold as our benchmark, and you can be assured that we're going to maintain price stability, and you'll be able to cash in for gold at a certain price, some system like that. Well, you can do that. We've done it before, and you could certainly devise something like that to restore confidence, and you may have to. No central bank in the world wants a gold standard.
But do you think, I've been hearing, obviously China and Russia are buying a lot of gold, and I think Iran recently introduced a gold crypto or something like that. So it seems to be some countries are maybe headed in that direction.
Listen where this goes really quickly. He gets back on gold pricing. Listen to this.
Something that they're gearing up for?
Yes, and that's a separate issue. We can talk about that in a minute, because now you're into geopolitics and financial warfare and all that. But just to kind of finish on the gold price. So it's critical, if you have any kind of new gold standard, that you get the price right. It's one of the criticisms of a gold standard. You hear it over and over. And I talk about this in my book, The New Case for Gold. People say, well, gold's interesting. It used to be the monetary standard, but there's not enough gold in the world to support commerce and credit and extended balance sheets and payments. And there's just not enough gold in the world to do that. And that's nonsense. There's always enough gold. It's just a question of price. Now, at $1,500 an ounce U.S., which is approximately where it is today, no, there's not enough gold, because the gold you have at $1,500 would only, you would have to drastically reduce the money supply by over 50% to maintain that parity of gold to money, and that would cause the greatest depression since the Great Depression. It would be highly deflationary. But you could take the same amount of gold and reprice it at $10,000 an ounce, and now suddenly the same gold would support a much larger money supply. So it's never a question of how much gold you have. It's a question of what's the price. And if you took so China, U.S., Japan, and Europe, they're the big four. I mean, there are other important, Canada, Australia, UK are all important, but those four countries are over 80% of global GDP. Their M1 money supply is about $24 trillion. So what if you said, okay, we want 40% gold backing? And historically, that's a pretty high number. Some people would say it has to be 100%. Other people would be comfortable with less. But let's just say 40%. Well, 40% of 24 trillion is $9.6 trillion. There are 33,000 tons of official gold in the world. That's not counting private gold, which is a larger number, but that's owned by central banks. Well, if you take 33,000 tons divided by $9.6 trillion, which is how much you have to back, it comes out to about $10,000 an ounce. So when I say that number, it's not pulled out of thin air. It's actually the implied non-deflationary price of gold to have any kind of gold standard. By the way, we've had two great bull markets in gold. 1971 to 1980, gold went up over 2,000%, from $35 an ounce to $800 an ounce. From 1999 to 2011, gold went up 700%, from about $250 an ounce to $1,900 an ounce. So the new bull market, the one we're in now, started on December 16, 2015. You can actually date it. That was the low, $1,050 an ounce. It's up about 50% from there. So the first bull market was up 2,000%. The second one was up 700%. The new one's up 50%. It has very far to run. This will go on for years. But if you just took the average of 2,700 and applied that to the new bull market, guess what? You'd get to $14,000 an ounce. So my only point is these are very simple calculations. They're historically rooted. They're not made up. But numbers like $10,000, $15,000 an ounce are not pie in the sky.
Unbelievable remarks from Jim Rickards right there. And listen, when you take in fact what he's saying about 10 to 15,000 just based on the last couple, 2 or 3 bull runs that they've had and where it could put it, now couple that with the idea of a new financial instrument that is actually a gold-backed bond that backs the 4 or 5 major currencies of the world. All right, guys, I just wanted to bring this up because we certainly are in the middle of a global liquidity crisis as well as a pandemic. And I think the two together have just been a 1-2 punch that's been very difficult for the world to handle. And we've yet to really see how they're truly going to be able to handle and get out of this situation. Remember, the last crisis, the hedge funds got bailed out. And then after that, now the central banks are carrying the debt. And now we're in the next crisis and the central banks are stuck. Who's going to bail out the central banks? I don't know about you, but this gets more interesting for the role of XRP in this new world and the new financial system. All right, guys, that's going to do it for me. I'm going to hit that like and subscribe. Share this with somebody you know. I'll catch you on the next one.